Welcome to Community Alert. Not if, but when. Positive preparation for disaster with Ted Adams and Mike Williams, keeping you informed on how to get ready and be prepared. Tuesdays at 11 a.m. and 9 p.m. and Saturdays at 1 p.m. on the Santa Barbara News Press radio station.
Ted.
Hey folks, welcome to another edition of Community Alert. I'm Ted Adams. My co-host is Mike Williams. And today we're visiting with some old friends and new friend, Chris. And it's an interesting program. I'm glad you folks are listening. We're going to be talking with Lee Chiacos, who's the author of the book on Mountain Drive, a community, an eclectic community in Santa Barbara up on Mountain Drive that started up right after the Second World War and is still going on today in kind of reflection of its former glory, which was in the 60s pretty much. I'm going to be talking both with Lee Chiacos, who's the author, and with Chris. Gosh, I don't know why I'm missing out on Chris Ervin. Chris Ervin, who is an archivist for the Santa Barbara Historical Museum, and they are putting on a show this week that'll open on. Actually for a month, and it's going to open on Thursday, and there's going to be a little celebration.
It'll be on 3 months.
Oh, 3 months until February. That's right. So very good. Well, so we decided to bring them on board and to talk a bit about the community. I lived there, actually. I was blessed to be able to live there at pretty much in their heyday, which was the early 60s, and very formative for a lot of my feelings and ideas, and a lot of my friends. I formed a lot of friendships there. So I'm going to turn it over to Lee and let him do an introduction a bit to the show, to what's coming up at the museum, and also to some of the history of Mountain Drive. And Lee, give us some of that, and kind of keep about a fist between you and the mic here. I find that's a good.
Hello, everyone. Mountain Drive was a unique community that developed on the GI Bill, basically, because there was a fellow named Bobby Hyde, who was the son of a prominent artist in Santa Barbara. Eventually, Bobby, his son, was born in Chicago in 1900, but the family moved to Santa Barbara, and Bobby was interested in creating what he called utopian community. So he was living on the Riviera in the early 40s, and he was married to the love of his life after a long hiatus, which you can read about in the book Mountain Drive if you can get a hold of a copy. But I'm going to start telling you about their development of the 50 acres that was purchased by Bobby Hyde when he was looking for 1 acre to buy to get out of town. And at that time, the 50 acres had been burned by a fire that was started by some construction workers, and it was available for as much as 1 acre was available. So Bobby Hyde, in his prescience, decided, well, I'll buy it, and then I'll start finding some like-minded people to join me and build their houses. I'll help them build, and we'll give them a good deal. So during the World War II, Bobby and his wife, Florence, who was she was commonly called Floppy because her sisters couldn't pronounce Florence. Bobby and Floppy started building their adobe house on a flat area just below Mountain Drive between Coyote Road and Cold Spring. The 50 acres was land that was above them and below them, and it was very much destroyed by fire, except that we know the chaparral grows back. So it was growing back while they were down in Los Angeles working on making airplanes for the war effort. They also built a house in Manhattan Beach at the time, and Bobby's approach to building was to buy land, build a campsite, and then build the house. And that's what he did on Mountain Drive, too. They would go up there when they had time off from building airplanes during World War II, and they built the beginnings of their adobe house. After World War II, he went to Santa Barbara College, which at the time was on the Riviera. And this was the precursor to UCSB. It moved out to its present location after World War II, but several years after. So in the beginning, the students were at this Riviera campus. Many of them were GIs returning from the war, and he offered them an acre of land for $50 down and $50 a month, $2,000 total, with advice and help to build an adobe house and to outfit it with materials that were salvaged from old houses. Bobby had a little bulldozer, and he would bulldoze a road. And then there was a pipe that came from the Bothena estate. And the Bothena estate was below the Mountain Drive community. And so people began to camp on their land and build houses. So that's the beginning.
Oh, very good. And Chris, maybe you could talk to us a little bit about how the museum got the idea and got started on putting this show together. That's interesting.
Sure. So about 2 years ago, we discovered a box of oral histories, and that had been kind of set aside and not really much fanfare about it. And these oral histories were conducted by earlier volunteers at the Historical Museum in the mid-1980s, early 1990s, because they had realized that they needed to capture Mountain Drive, this history that occurred in the 1950s and the 1960s, and that the people were starting to die. The original folks who, if you will, homesteaded on Bobby Hyde's 1 acres. And so there's about 30 of these interviews with old timers. And although you are not one of them,
no,
I know.
That's fine.
But lots of names you would recognize. And so realizing we had this treasure, and then I found Lee's book, which is the roadmap basically to Mountain Drive. So I could put all this together, and I realized this is this wonderful treasure. Mostly oral histories are done with single individuals, and you hear about their wonderful life and all their accomplishments. But here you have 30 interviews, all of folks who all had the same experience, all talking about the same parties that they all went to, and the grape stomp, and this shared experience in which they all continue to have wonderful memories about. And so anyway, with these oral histories, and I contacted Lee, and one thing we were missing was photographs. We had no photographs of Mountain Drive, and I knew there had to be some out there. And so with Lee's help, we now have several hundred that we've collected from some of the old timers. And so now with photos, with oral histories that we've digitized and created nice little audio clips. So I brought some actually with us here, that we could actually start to understand the folks, their own experience that they had there on Mountain Drive. So anyway, that's kind of it. It's just kind of blossomed from there. In the last 2 years, we've put this exhibit together.
So we're going to pick this up after the break. And so, Mike, go for it.
Memories of Mountain Drive, Santa Barbara's Bohemian community, Thursday, October 6th through February 28th. In the late 1940s, a unique community began to form in southern South Coast foothills. Now, through the works of art, photographs, written and recorded memories, Santa Barbara Historical Museum presents the story of the flowering of the enclave of the free spirits that took the name and the road which wound up in the hearts of so many, Mountain Drive. It'll be on first Thursdays, 5 5 through 7 p.m., October 6th at the opening celebration at 5 p.m., November 3rd, December 1st, and February 2nd at the Santa Barbara Historical Museum, 136 East De La Guerra in Santa Barbara. Further information at their website, sbhistorical.org. And with that, we'll be back in just a minute with more with Ted Adams, Mike Williams on Community Alert, Not If But When, Positive Preparation for Disaster on KZSB-AM 1290 and FM 96.9. And welcome back to Community Alert. And the Santa Barbara Fire Safe Council invites you to the Wildfire Preparedness Expo, October 14th and 15th. Direct Relief, 6100 Wallace Becknell Road in Goleta. The two-day expo is designed to educate everyone threatened by wildfire and interactive activities and expert guest speakers. Event starts on Friday at 4:30 with a presentation from UCLA Professor Gregory Park Williams, who will discuss why have humans lost control of wildfire in the western United States. A reception will immediately follow. Saturday, festivities start at 11 a.m. with expert panel of speakers representing fire, planning, Sheriff's Department, and the California Department of Insurance, fire apparatus from local fire stations, hotshot crew demonstrations, live fire extinguisher training, fire prevention bounce house, and weather permitting, a Firehawk helicopter demonstration will round out the weekend. Please stand and plan on stopping by the Santa Barbara County Fire Safe Council Wildfire Expo, October 14th and the 15th at Direct Relief, 6100 Wallace Becknell Road in Goleta. With free pizza, popcorn, and prizes, there's something for the entire family. That's October 14th and 15th, Direct Relief, 6100 Wallace Becknell Road in Goleta. And Ted.
So today we're visiting with Lee Chiacos and Chris Ervin, who is Lee is the author of a book on Mountain Drive. And today we're talking about Mountain Drive because Lee Ervin and the Santa Barbara Historical Museum have put together a show about Mountain Drive from its inception until probably present time, but mostly 60s and 70s, I think, because that was a premier time for Mountain Drive. Mm-hmm. And we had, well, let's just start with you two. How did Lee, how did you and Chris get together? Chris, how did you and Lee get together? How did that work out?
Well, as I mentioned, I had found these oral histories. I found Lee's book and put them together, and I found out through my contacts, Lee was still around, so I thought I would just contact him and see what we can make happen with this, because we didn't have any photographs. I knew there was other stuff. I didn't have any contacts in the Mountain Drive community. Obviously, Lee did. So it was a way of gathering more historical information to help round out our collection, because, like I said, we have these wonderful oral histories, but nothing else in support of it. So I called Lee. He was in Santa Fe, New Mexico at the time, and so he's mentioned he's gotten excited about this since I brought it back to his attention. It's been 20, almost 30 years since you wrote the book, right? So Lee, so
yes, it was 1993 when I wrote the book and collected the stories and photographs, and Ted was one of the people I contacted, and he was very helpful in making the book happen. And many other people whose names appear in the acknowledgments at the end of the book. And what excited me when Chris called me was that even though the book was done so long ago, it still has interest. A lot of people have interest in this community. Unfortunately, because of fire, there's almost nothing left of the old community. Between the first the Refugio fire in 1955, then the Coyote fire in 1964, and the Sycamore fire in 1977, and then we had the Jesusita and the Tea fires. And the Tea fire kind of finished the community off. There are still, I think, 3 or 4 of the old adobes left. Stan Hill's place, Bill Neely's Mazatlan, the small house that they built. They had 3 acres and they built 3 houses. And so losing all the houses to fire, and so much of the traditions have been changed now that the community has had to disperse. But there is still a lot of activity that was started way back in 1950.
Well, that activity, I think that it because of after the Second World War, there was so much military influence. I mean, this is my own surmise, but I think that the country was fairly conservative at that time, and most of the social mores were fairly conservative, and was very people were having families and buying houses. The house market was low. It was easy for people to acquire property, and so communities were developing. But they were all quite conservative, And I think that Bobby rebelled against that, and he created an environment where people could create their own homes, and an environment also culturally where they could live a life that was much more less constrained by the conservative attitude. And so what happened was that it brought together people not only to build and live in that area, but also artists and freedom lovers from all over the place came and stayed and spent time there, and I mean authors and poets and philosophers, and then later on, Timothy Leary and Dick Alpert came and stayed there for a while, and I think Dylan Thomas came there, and
Alan Watts.
And Alan Watts, actually, his daughter married one of the people on Mountain Drive. And so, there was a lot of influence that came from outside. And also the Pattersons, who were the folks who started the Renaissance Fair, were inspired by what was called the Pot Wars at that time on Mountain Drive, where all the artists, there were a number of potters and people that made textiles and things like that would get together on weekends, and they'd have a sale up on some of the property up there, and they would dress in Renaissance attire, and of course the wine was flowing, and the goodwill, and the singing, and and all the food. There was fantastic food at that time. The women did an amazing job of creating food. And I remember when I was in my early 20s up there that I was helping Ed Schertz, who was a resident of a long time, build his house. And his lady, Mary Lynn, was a fantastic cook. And we would finish up the morning, and she would bring out all this food for us, all fresh baked bread and all these salads and all this very healthy food. I was just marvelous. And we'd just sit out on the ground with this incredible view and have a glass of wine and a lovely meal, and that was so appealing. And it kind of it's engrossing, and you get involved in that, and I have to accede to a break. I'm getting the high sign. Here we go.
You are indeed, Ted. We'll be back in just a minute. We're talking about the memories of Mountain Drive, Santa Barbara's Bohemian community. It'll be at the Santa Barbara Historical Museum, 136 East De La Guerra. That'll start on Thursday, October 6th through February 28th, 2023. The first Thursdays, 5 through 7, starting on October 6th, opening celebration 5 p.m., November 3rd, December 1st, and February 2nd. Further information at sbhistorical.org. That's sbhistorical.org. We will be right back after this with Ted Adams, Mike Williams on Community Alert, Not If But When, Positive Preparation for Disaster on KZSB-AM 1290, FM 96.9.
Welcome back to Community Alert. I'm Ted Adams. My co-host is Mike Williams. And today we're visiting with Lee Chiacos and Chris Ervin, who actually Lee is the author of the book on Mountain Drive, and Chris is putting together a Santa Barbara Historical Museum show that's going to run for 3 months or 4 months or something like that, and on Mountain Drive and the experience of Mountain Drive since the Second World War present time, primary concentrating on Mountain Drive during the 60s because it was so dynamic and such an experience for all of us that lived there at that time. And so I think that, I don't know, we want to pick up here.
Oh, well, I thought of what I was going to say before the break. And that was that when Chris came on board with this, he got me excited. And now he's done as much for the preservation of the history of Mountain Drive as I have, only in digital form that's so much more accessible. And so now you can go to the website and listen to the oral histories. You can see all the pictures that he's scanned into the website. And it's just a tremendously helpful way to learn about this wonderful Santa Barbara history.
So, Chris, how do you find this history on the website? Could you describe that for us?
Sure. If you go to our website, our sbhistorical.org, and you look for Glut Hill Library, that's our research library there at the museum, you can navigate through to our oral histories, and we have a special website devoted to Mountain Drive oral histories, and the oral histories being the kind of the heart of our materials, but I've expanded it to other materials like as Lee mentioned, and there's actually, it's interesting is that, of course, the Santa Barbara News Press has documented Mountain Drive, not intentionally, but ever since 1949. We've got I've found articles, newspaper articles, for nearly every year that have occurred up to the present. So I've captured those on the website. Music, of course, music was a big part of Mountain Drive.
Scragg family.
Scragg family, and the Hyde's son, Joel Hyde, was a harpist.
Joel Andrews.
Joel Andrews, thank you. And he, there's a video, there's a community access video of him playing the harp, and so I've linked to that, and all kinds of, there was Renaissance music, Baroque music was Eric Katz led a group up there called Musicum Collegium, and right, exactly. And so I found that album. UCSB has a copy of that album. They graciously provided me the music, which we have on our website, and so you can start to bring all these pieces together and get a feel for it, as Lee said, through a digital experience, a virtual experience.
So 2 or 3 years ago, Bendy White and myself put together a group of people who came and actually, we have a number of videos, probably 4 or 5 hours of videos of people from Old Mountain Drive talking and telling stories and chatting with each other and stuff. And those are really fun. I should get you a copy of that so that you could...
I've heard about that, and we would love to be able to have a copy of that. And
it's very unprofessional, but it's just a big armchair discussion. We're just sitting around it. We start with a topic, and then, of course, we go off in all different directions and all these different stories and stuff. But it's very similar to this radio program where we just kind of sit around and chat, and it kind of creates itself. And it's evocative. It's a nice set of things, so we should get you some.
And one of the beauties of that collection is that it includes some of the younger people that were children of the old mountain drivers.
Exactly. And it's I mean, there's just so much. It's so rich, and one of the things that with Lee's book is that it could be 2.5 inches thick, rather than half an inch thick, because there's so much to be told. And he did a masterful job of cutting through a lot of it and just picking certain aspects of it. But it is an incredibly rich history of a particular movement in this country that was kind of going against the currents to a tremendous extent. And especially with things like building codes, that came into effect in the midst of the whole thing, and they pretty much ignore the building codes most of the time, to good and negative results, because a lot of the guys really didn't know what they were doing, and some of those buildings didn't last. The one of the things that they did is they did make sure that the children went to school, which is is a positive aspect of all of it. And they, there were certain things that they adhered to, but by and large, up there on the drive during those years, no one wore any clothing except to protect oneself from the elements. And if you went downtown, I can remember going downtown to the grocery store on Montecito Street, which is the closest store at that time, just wrapping a towel around myself, and going to the store, getting what I needed, and going back up the hill, Well, it was just kind of, that's the way we were living at the time, and it was a great life. It was very interesting,
and Bobby Hyde was known for running around in camouflage.
Yes.
I don't know if you recall that. But,
yeah, he had a camouflage, and it was interesting. He affected that for a while, and then that was kind of a fad that he went through, And I noticed this morning when I was going through Lee's book that there's several photos of Bobby in his camouflage outfit. And there also, interestingly enough, there are many pictures of young people that I don't recognize. They just happened to be around and came up from the city college or from the university or whatever, and of course they were very curious and interested in what was going on up there. And we're time for a break.
Well, we got to take a break. We'll be back in just a minute, and we'll be visiting again with Ted, Lee, and Chris in just a minute. Don't forget, the Santa Barbara County Fire Safe Council invites you to the second Wildfire Preparedness Expo, October 14th and 15th at Direct Relief, 6100 Wallace Becknell Road in Goleta. And with that, we'll be back in just a minute with more Community Alert on KZSB-AM 1290, FM 96.9.
Hey folks, welcome back to Community Alert. I'm Ted Adams. My co-host is Mike Williams. And today we're visiting with Lee Chiacos and with Chris. Chris, I don't know why I have a hard time with your name, Chris. Chris Ervin. Ervin?
It's Ervin. Yes.
Okay. And Chris is an archivist at Santa Barbara Historical Museum, and Lee is a great friend for many years, and he's the author of a book on Mountain Drive. And today we're talking about Mountain Drive and about Bobby Hyde and all the people, the characters who were involved in that community for so many years. And Chris was just asking me about something that I did with Bobby. The summer of 1965, Bobby Hyde and two of the children that he adopted. He wrote a book of six more at 60 when he actually adopted a family of six Hispanic children that had come up from the border, and they needed help, and Bobby provided it by adopting them. And so two of them and one of Bobby's daughters and four of his grandchildren and myself got into this Chevy van, and we drove up to Vancouver Island. And it was quite an adventure, I have to say. Traveling with Bobby and Angie Bjorklund, which is his daughter, and Angie was one of the priceless characters in Santa Barbara history. We could talk for hours about Angie. But Angie had baked she baked about 6 loaves of bread, and we had 2 big crates of fresh oranges. And so we ate bread and oranges all the way from Santa Barbara to Campbell River on Vancouver Island. And one of the more humorous parts of that was when we went into Canada across the border. We had to stop at the border, and Bobby owned land up there, but he had to explain, and we all had to explain who we were and what our relationship was to Bobby, and because we were such a disparate group of people that were in this van together, And it took us a couple of hours, but finally we convinced them that we were okay, And I went up and spent a couple of glorious weeks on this little cove up off of Quadra Island, which is right off of Campbell River, which is on Vancouver Island. And we used to have to take the boat to the store, which is about an hour across the ocean in this little aluminum boat to get supplies. And that was an adventure in itself. But he'd built a cabin up there out of driftwood. And there was a stream that came down and entered this little cove off the island into the ocean. And so there were these amazing beds of oysters and of shellfish of all kinds. And so we ate a great deal of shellfish. And Bobby spent a lot of time on the beach collecting these things and putting out on trays over driftwood coals, and he would cook them, and then he packed them in olive oil and quart olive oil jars with olive oil and took them back to Santa Barbara and ate them throughout the year. And they were amazingly delicious oysters and shellfish, and it was wonderful time together, and we just all kind of hung out and swam in the ocean and watched the eagles fly down and grab fish out of the ocean and found vertebrae of salmon drooped over or draped over the shrubbery and trees along the ridge line above the ocean there, and you could go up and find these things, and we would get them and we would string them and make necklaces for the ladies back home. I mean, they made beautiful necklaces, these vertebrae. Anyway, we had a great time. That was a great adventure. Lee.
Ted, you're reminding me of some other stories that I've heard about Bobby, and I think he was the quintessential independent mountain man, because the reason he wore fatigues in the early 50s was that he would buy them at the Army surplus. And he also had a weapons carrier that he used for transport to the hot springs, and all the kids would jump in with him, and they'd go on these local adventures too. And he also had a strong interest in mushrooms. He was very fond of fruit, and he had a friend who had an orchard in Carpinteria, and he brought several olive trees up to Mountain Drive, and they are still on the old property. The old house is for sale now, but it's been drastically altered, and the swimming pool is still there, and the olive trees dropping olives all over the place. And I think he was one of the pioneers of gray water too, because he planted avocado trees and situated the swimming pool so that, because it didn't have a filter, he had to empty it periodically, and it would be emptied out into the orchard and all the fruit trees. Additionally, he tried to grow some of his own food, and of course, the big draw there was that you could buy land from Bobby, and he expanded his empire from Mountain Drive up to Painted Cave, and that's where Ted bought his property and from Bobby High.
Yeah, several of us bought from Bobby at that time, and he actually he bought so much land in Painted Cave, and the water company in Painted Cave had a quarter of an acre. A share in the water company for every quarter of an acre. So when Bobby bought the 91 acres up there, he bought the lion's share of the shares in the water company. So then he decided that he was going to build a lake up there. And the reason he wanted to build a lake was because they were disallowing him from building a house. He wouldn't give him a permit. And then he inquired about whether they required permits for houseboats, and they said no, they did not. So he built this lake up there, and then he built a houseboat on it. And just in typical Bobby fashion, it was a lot of 50-gallon drums that were floating on a framework, and then this house that was made of old doors and things like that. And it was a place for him to go up and hang out, because he loved that property up there, and he would go and have a glass of wine with people in his houseboat. And it was just one of Bobby's eccentricities, And he was quite a good mycologist, and he was good. He knew his plants, his native plants. He was very interested in the native flora and fauna, and he was very much involved in eating what he could eat and knowing what he couldn't eat, and all of that sort of thing. He was a very magical guy. He had a whole lot of different interests, and he played Go, which is a game that many people are familiar with, and many have no idea what it is. But it's pretty much black and white rocks on a board and moving them around, and he was a great proponent of it, and he played chess, and he was a great. He loved to talk metaphysics. He was a great. Martin Buber was one of his favorites, and he just had all of these attributes that made him such a compelling and interesting guy. And I spent a lot of time with him. He kind of took me under his wing, and he was very helpful in purchasing my property in Painted Cave, and I bought 10 acres from him for $14,000 in 1968, which created a life for me, a lifetime. I mean, I've been up there ever since that. Moved up there in 65, and I've been in Painted Cave ever since. And so we're pushing, 55, 60 years up there. And it's been a wonderful life, and I owe a great deal of it to Bobby. So.
And Ted, what about Floppy? Did you know her well?
I did know Floppy. I got to know her better when Bobby died. He died in 1969 at 69 years old. He never made it to 70. And then Floppy took over for Bobby and kind of ran the family and they had sold all these properties to people for this low down payment and payments every month. And then her job, of course, was to keep the financial boat afloat, was to collect from all these eccentric people, so she had quite a job on her hands, but she did a wonderful job, and she was such a wonderful person that it was hard to deny Floppy anything. She was such very special.
Well, we got to take a break. We'll be back in just a minute. We'll be visiting again with Ted, Lee, and Chris in just a minute. Don't forget, the Santa Barbara County Fire Safe Council invites you to the second Wildfire Preparedness Expo, October 14th and 15th at Direct Relief, 6100 Wallace Becknell Road in Goleta. And with that, we'll be back in just a minute with more Community Alert on KZSB-AM 1290, FM 96.9. Community Alert is sponsored by the Santa Barbara County Fire Safe Council. Their mission is to promote wildfire safety in Santa Barbara County through education and action. Visit sbfiresafecouncil.org to learn more about their programs and how you can mitigate the threat of wildfire on your property.
Hey folks, welcome back to Community Alert. This is our last segment. Today we've been visiting with Lee Chiacos and Chris Ervin. And Chris is an archivist for Santa Barbara Historical Museum. And Lee is many things, one of which is the author of a book on Mountain Drive. And we're talking about Mountain Drive today because there is going to be a show at the Historical Museum beginning on this Thursday, the 6th of October, and running through February. Sometime in February, I'm not sure, but running until February sometime. And so we've been talking about Mountain Drive, lots of stories and things. It's been wonderful reminiscing with you guys and brings a lot of fond memories back for me. And I'm going to turn it over to Chris and Lee and let them finish out the show. So,
yes, I just want to make sure everyone knows what you're getting into when you come to the museum, because this is going to be a special exhibit that'll include some wonderful footage of the very fantastic wine stomp that was produced for the movie Seconds, which you can sometimes see on some networks. It shows up on television periodically. It was a movie with Rock Hudson, and it turned out to be a benefit to the community because the community received $5,000 for the fire department to use for fire protection up on Mountain Drive. And the wine stomp was done in a very elaborate approach, kind of Hollywood style. And this is going to be projected on the wall at the museum on First Thursday coming up. Also, there is a short clip that was out at UCSB of one of the early pot wars, which became the beach show. It got so elaborate up in the mountain that the fire department closed it when people were parking all the way down Sycamore Canyon Road. So now the beach show is an extension of that. And also the solstice parade began on Mountain Drive when it was the birthday of, what's his name, Michael Rodriguez?
Might be. I'm not sure.
And then there was the hot tub craze that we briefly mentioned. And the wine stomp was the beginning of the wine industry in Santa Barbara. Pierre Lafond and Stan Hill were among the very first people to commercialize winemaking after the early attempts by Bill Neely and Stan and some other mountain drivers. So this is going to be quite a nice display of artifacts, photographs, and film. And Chris, would you like to say something about the show?
Sure. The other, those are great aspects of the other aspects that we're highlighting is some of the actual artifacts, pottery by Bill Neely and Ed Schertz, musical instruments that were actually used by Bill Neely, Bill Neely's concertina, Peter Feldman's banjo with the Scragg family. And just all kinds of, we're trying to represent, oh yeah, the conga drums, yes, the drums, and some wonderful snippets about the drums on Mountain Drive, and so just a little bit of everything to try and give folks a flavor, and of course this wonderful photo wall of mostly black and white photographs from the 1950s and 1960s that really give a flavor. Mountain drivers did a great job of documenting themselves in those early days.
And Chris, tell us about how you can use your smartphone to access snippets of the oral histories during the show.
Oh, right. So what we've got QR codes on there on the walls, and you'll be able to use your smartphone just to take a quick snap, and that will lead you to a link that will play back like a 1-minute audio snippet from each of our oral histories, which we've kind of high graded them and down to their essentials. And so you can hear, of these 30 oral histories that we've got, you can hear some great variety of men and women and the offspring of mountain drivers talk about what it was like to live on Mountain Drive.
Wonderful. It's a great gesture you guys are doing. I think the right amount of time has passed, and I think that it's something that is so evocative for those of us that lived parts of it. And as you mentioned earlier, many of the people that were active in Mountain Drive are no longer with us, and it's shrinking rapidly. And so hopefully on Thursday we'll have a number of those folks coming. I know I've been speaking to them, and they're all going to come in. So we'll have a great day on Thursday, and I think the show will be really well received. So I'm hoping it will. Anyway.
And that's beginning at 5 o'clock. It'll be 5 to 7 on Thursday.
Okay, so are you going to chase us out at 7 o'clock? I also heard that you had a hot tub you were going to have.
Well, we've tried to pursue getting a hot tub. We've not succeeded yet.
I was looking forward to getting in that hot tub.
If you know of one, we'd love to have it. We still got a spot for it.
What I'm hearing from you guys is that Mountain Drive had a significant cultural influence on the greater Santa Barbara community, more so than maybe most people realize. Hence the reason that the museum is interested in promoting, because when you think of Santa Barbara, this isn't necessarily the first thing that comes to mind, but what I'm hearing is the influence that Mountain Drive had on so many aspects of Santa Barbara.
So be it. So, well, I don't know
where do people get further information? I guess that's the best thing for Chris to get into. What's the best place for people to go?
Sure. At our website, sbhistorical.org is a great place to start. Look under our events tab, and you'll find the exhibition listed there. and from there you can go to all kinds of various links to the oral histories as I've described. And
So you mentioned that it's open all the time. Was it within the hours of operation?
oh, right. Yeah, the museum is open Wednesdays through Sundays usually from noon to 5. So all are welcome, and the exhibit is open at all times. We're just having this nice casual reception on Thursday, so there'll be some nice wine appropriately served.
I heard that Robbie Robinson might be bringing out some of his Pagan Brothers wine, and I heard from one of the mountain drivers.
Well, I imagine there may be some surprises that we're not anticipating.
Well, that's it. That's a wrap. Well, thank you very much, guys, for coming on in here. This has been Community Alert with Ted Adams, Mike Williams, sponsored by the Santa Barbara County Fire Safe Council. Until next week, you're listening to KZSB AM 1290 and FM 96.9. See you next week.
Community Alert is produced by the Wildland Residents Association, San Marcos Pass Volunteer Fire Department. Technical assistance is provided by Jim Williams and Richard Dugan. The opinions expressed are those of the hosts and guests and should not be interpreted as necessarily representing the opinions or policies of this station or sponsors. For further information, please call 805-964-7194 or visit wildlandresidents.org. Commercial use of this program is prohibited.